You sure about this assignment, babe? 18 months is a long time. My husband set down his coffee mug and looked at me with that expression he always used when he'd already made up his mind but wanted me to think I was part of the conversation. Patient. Slightly condescending. Like I was a child asking why the sky was blue. It's London, sweetheart. This is the kind of opportunity that doesn't come twice. He reached across the breakfast table and squeezed my hand. We talked about this. We had talked about it for exactly 45 minutes on a Tuesday night, between him scrolling through his phone and me pretending I wasn't noticing that he kept tilting the screen away from me. He presented it like a done deal wrapped in the question. The company needed their best project lead on the ground for the UK expansion. The salary bump was significant, and besides, it was only 18 months. Practically nothing. I'm a nurse. I work 36-hour weeks at a hospital in Seattle. I couldn't just pack up and move to London, and my husband knew that before he walked into that kitchen with his announcement dressed up as a discussion. I just wish I could come with you, I said. He smiled. I know, but you love your job, and it's 18 months, not forever. His name was Garrett. We've been married 6 years, together for 9. I was 28 when we got married, convinced I'd found the person who saw me more clearly than anyone else ever had. He was 31, charming in that low-key way that sneaks up on you, funny enough that you forgive the sharp edges, successful enough that you tell yourself the ambition is a feature, not a warning. We didn't have kids. We talked about it, really talked about it, not the Garrett version, and decided we'd wait until we were more settled. We had a joint savings account with $480,000 in it. That sounds like a lot, and it was. But 9 years of 2 incomes and almost no vacations because Garrett was always too busy will do that. I've contributed the majority of it. My salary wasn't glamorous, but nursing pays steadily, and I'd been putting away 15% of every paycheck since my first year out of school. I drove him to SeaTac on a Thursday morning in November. He had 2 large suitcases and a carry-on and the kind of energy that made me feel, even then, like I was watching someone start a chapter of their life that didn't include me. At the gate, he held my face in his hands and kissed me, and I cried. Genuinely, because whatever had been feeling off for months, I still loved him. Or I still loved the idea of him, which at that point felt like the same thing. 18 months, he said. I'll be home before you know it. I waved until he disappeared through the gate. Then I walked back to the car, sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, and drove home to our 2-quiet house. The first 2 months were fine, in the way that fine means you've stopped noticing the temperature because you've adjusted to the cold. We FaceTimed every few days. He was tired. The time difference was hard. Seattle is 8 hours behind London. He was working constantly. The project was more complex than expected. I understood. I told myself I understood. Then the calls started getting shorter. Then they started getting rescheduled. Something came up. He was in a dinner with clients. He'd call tomorrow. I worked nights sometimes, so I started texting him during my breaks at 2 and 3 a.m. Seattle time, which was morning for him. He'd respond hours later, one-line answers, or sometimes not at all until evening. I told myself it was the job. I told myself I was being paranoid. I have a coworker named Sandra, 10 years older than me, who went through a divorce 3 years ago and came out the other side with a clarity that I always admired and slightly feared. She was the first person I said it out loud to, standing by the nurse's station at the end of a long shift. Something feels wrong and I don't know if I'm making it up. Sandra handed me a coffee and looked at me the way only someone who's been through it can look at you. You're not making it up, she said. You never are. I went home that morning and I did what I'd been trying not to do for weeks. I logged into the account we shared for streaming services. We'd been sharing a login since we started dating. One of those early relationship intimacies you don't think about. He'd never changed the password. There was a second profile. Created 4 months ago. Named L. I sat on the edge of our bed for a very long time. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds. A second streaming profile isn't evidence of anything except maybe bad organizational habits. I know that. I told myself that, but something had already shifted in me by then. Some quiet alarm that had been going off at low volume for months. and I stopped ignoring it. I hired a private investigator. I know that sounds dramatic. It felt dramatic. His name was someone I found through a referral from a friend of a friend, a quiet, methodical man in his 50s who told me his rate told me what he could and couldn't do across international lines and didn't make me feel like a paranoid wife. 3 weeks later, he sent me a folder. My husband had been seeing someone since before he left for London. Her name didn't matter to me then, and it doesn't matter now. What mattered was that she worked for the same company, that she transferred to the London office 6 weeks before Garrett announced his opportunity, and that there were photographs of them at restaurants, at a market, outside an apartment building that was not his corporate housing. I remember reading the investigator's report twice. Then I closed my laptop, went to the bathroom, and threw up. Then I washed my face, looked at myself in the mirror for a long time, and went back to the kitchen and made dinner. That was a Thursday. I gave myself the weekend. I cried on Friday. Properly. Deeply. The kind of crying that feels like it's coming from somewhere in your chest you didn't know existed. I cried for the 9 years, and for the wedding, and for the house we'd bought together, and for all the times I'd defended him to my mother when she said he seemed a little checked out. I cried for the baby we talked about having someday, which now felt like a conversation he'd been having with me just to keep me in place. On Saturday, I called my older sister. Her name is Renata. She drove to my house with takeout and a bottle of wine and sat on my couch until midnight listening to me talk. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I know I'm not going to panic." On Sunday, I made a list. The first thing I did on Monday morning was call an attorney. I'd done enough reading over the weekend to know that divorce law varies by state, and Washington is a community property state, which meant the division of assets would be based on what was acquired during the marriage. I needed someone who knew exactly what that meant for our specific situation. The attorney I found, a woman named after a city I'd always wanted to visit, which felt like a small sign, sat across from me in her downtown office and listened without expression while I laid out the situation. Then she asked me a series of very precise questions. When did we marry? What was the balance of the joint account? What were my contributions versus his? Did we have a prenup? We did not. Based on what you've described, she said, you have a strong case for a favorable division of the savings account, particularly if we can document your contribution history. Washington courts consider equitable distribution, and the disparity you're describing in contributions is significant. She explained the process. She told me what to gather. Bank statements going back to the beginning of the account. Pay stubs. Tax returns. Any documentation of the affair that might be relevant to asset protection. I want to be very clear about what I did next, because I've had people ask me, and I've also had people judge me before asking. I did not drain our joint account and run. What I did was this. I opened a separate individual account at a different bank. I then transferred the portion of the joint account that my attorney and I had calculated as clearly attributable to my contributions, documented, defensible, and done with legal guidance. It was not all of it. It was the majority of it because the majority of it was mine. Then I waited. I know people assume I must have felt triumphant. I didn't. I felt steady, the way you feel after you've been dreading a difficult conversation and then you finally have it, and the world doesn't end. I felt like I was standing on solid ground for the first time in months. Garrett called me on a Wednesday evening, about 2 weeks after I'd met with the attorney. It was morning for him. He sounded distracted. "Hey, quick question. Did you move money from our savings?" I had been waiting for this. I'd thought about it, rehearsed it, sat with it. I decided I wasn't going to perform anything. No fake confusion, no tearful confrontation over the phone. Just the truth, delivered quietly. "Yes," I said. Silence. "What? Why? How much?" "Garrett," I said. "I know about London, I know about her, and I've spoken to an attorney." The silence this time was different. Longer. I could hear him breathing. It's complicated. I'm not calling to discuss it, I said. "I'm calling to let you know that you'll be receiving divorce papers. My attorney will be in touch with yours." I hung up. He called back 4 times. I let it go to voicemail. His messages went from confused to defensive to something that tried very hard to sound like remorse, but couldn't quite get there. The last message, he said he loved me and he'd made a terrible mistake and we could work through this. I deleted all 4 messages and took a long bath. What happened in the months that followed was not a movie. There was no dramatic confrontation at an airport. There was no moment where he came crawling back and I delivered a devastating speech and walked away in slow motion. What there was paperwork and waiting and some very hard weeks, and a therapist I started seeing on Thursday afternoons who helped me stop narrating my own life like I was trying to make it make sense to an audience. The divorce was finalized 9 months after I first called my attorney. Washington's process takes time. There were negotiations, and there were moments where his attorney pushed back on the asset division, and there were moments where I sat in my sister Renata's kitchen eating cereal at 10 p.m. because I didn't want to go home to my quiet house. But I want to tell you something about those months, because I think the story people tell about women in my situation leaves this part out. It wasn't all devastation. There was grief, real grief, and I'm not going to minimize that. But there was also something else. This quiet, growing sense of my own life coming back into focus. I started sleeping better. That surprised me because I thought I'd lie awake in an empty bed feeling the absence, but the anxiety that had been living under my skin for the better part of a year, that low-frequency hum of something's wrong that I'd been trying to talk myself out of, it was gone. What was left was just me. I picked up hobbies I'd let slide. I started running again. I called my mother more. I let Sandra take me to trivia night at a bar near the hospital, where I was terrible at sports questions, and very good at history, and where I laughed more than I had in a long time. The financial settlement came through in August. The court's determination of my contributions, combined with the documentation my attorney had assembled, resulted in a division that reflected the reality of who had built that savings account over 9 years. I won't give you the exact number, but I will tell you that I was able to pay off the remainder of my student loans, which I had been carrying since nursing school, and put a down payment on a condo that is entirely mine. My name is the only name on the deed. I'm 34 now. I have a second bedroom that I've turned into a reading room, with a chair by the window and a lamp that I picked out myself and more books than I'll ever get through. I still work at the same hospital. I still have coffee with Sandra, who checks on me with the particular attentiveness of someone who's been where you've been and wants to make sure you're actually okay, and not just performing okay. A few months ago, I ran into someone from Garrett's office, someone who'd always been friendly to both of us at company parties. She didn't know I knew what she knew, I think, because she started to say something about what happened with Garrett in that careful, pitying way people do. I stopped her gently. "I'm doing really well," I said, genuinely. She looked at me for a moment, assessing, and then she nodded. I think she believed me, because it was the truth. Here's what I've been thinking about, what I keep coming back to when I tell this story in my head, which I do less now than I used to. I think about the version of me that was sitting at that breakfast table, watching my husband tilt his phone screen away from me, telling myself I was imagining things, and I want to say something to that woman. Something that would actually help. You are not imagining it. You are not too sensitive. You are not asking for too much. And you have more strength than you have any idea of right now. Because strength in the real world doesn't feel like strength. It feels like getting up and making the phone call, and then making the next one, and then making dinner, and then going to sleep, and doing it all again the next day, until one day you realize you're not dreading waking up anymore. The account I opened at that new bank, I still have it. It's mine. It was always mine. I just needed to remember that. And if you're a woman watching this right now, I want you to hear me. It does not matter how much you love someone, and it does not matter how much you trust them. Have your own account. Know your own financial situation. Understand what is in your name and what is not. Not because you're planning to leave, and not because you assume the worst, but because you are a person, and your financial independence is not a betrayal of your marriage. It is a foundation. It is the ground you stand on when everything else shifts. I know that now. I learned it the hard way, like most things worth knowing. I'm still learning. I've thought a lot about what actually made this happen, not the affair. I mean the whole shape of it. The years of slowly handing pieces of myself over to someone who kept them carelessly, The way I learned to second guess my own instincts because it was easier than confronting what they were telling me. I don't say this to be hard on myself. I say it because I think it's the most honest thing I can offer anyone who's sitting where I was sitting. There's a version of this story where I stayed quiet, where I kept telling myself I was imagining things, kept shrinking the alarm inside me until it was small enough to ignore. A lot of women live that version for years. I almost did. What changed wasn't a single moment of bravery. It wasn't some dramatic turning point where I suddenly became a different person. It was smaller than that. It was Sandra handing me a coffee and saying, "You're not making it up," and me deciding for once to believe her instead of Garrett. That's it. That's the whole hinge. I think about what Renata said to me on my couch that Saturday night, takeout containers between us, after I'd talked for 2 hours straight. She said, "You've been the responsible one this whole time. Act like it now." She meant it practically. Take care of your finances, protect yourself legally, don't make decisions from panic. But I've come to think she meant something bigger too. Even if she didn't know it. Responsibility, real responsibility, means being honest about what's actually happening, not what you wish were happening, not the version of events that's easier to live with. What's actually there in front of you when you stop looking away. Garrett made choices. I didn't control that. What I controlled was what I did after I knew, and I chose, slowly, carefully, with help from people I trusted, to act with my eyes open instead of my heart closed. That distinction matters to me. I didn't act out of rage. I didn't act out of revenge. I acted out of a clear-eyed understanding of what the situation was and what I deserved. The money was mine because I had earned it, year after year, paycheck after paycheck, while also loving someone who was slowly deciding I wasn't enough. Understanding that wasn't a small thing. It required me to hold two true things at the same time. I loved him, and he had treated me as disposable. Both were real. Neither one canceled the other out. What I know now, sitting in my reading room with the lamp I picked out myself, is that integrity isn't just about how you treat other people. It's about how you treat yourself. It's about whether you're willing to look at your own life clearly, even when what you see is painful, and act accordingly. Garrett didn't do that. I chose to. That choice didn't make everything easy. It made everything hard in a different way, a way I could actually live with. If I could say anything to the version of me sitting at that breakfast table, watching him tilt his phone away, I'd say this: trust the feeling. Not the fear, not the worst-case spiral, but that quiet, persistent knowing that something is wrong. That's not anxiety. That's intelligence. Listen to it. And then, this is the harder part, do something with what you hear. You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to know your own financial situation, your own legal rights, your own worth. None of that is a betrayal. All of it is wisdom. And wisdom, I've learned, is just honesty that you've had long enough to act on.